an adage of internet culture stating that, without a clear indicator of the author's intent, it is impossible to create a parody of extreme views such that it cannot be mistaken by some readers for a sincere expression of the views being parodied.
Welcome to the Pose Laws podcast. We're Jack and Levi, the internet's foremost anthropologists, exploring the obscure and the weird.
Yes, on the Pose Laws podcast, we are trawling the internet for fresh perspectives from the edge of culture, and we ask, is it a troll? So, Jack, what have we got on store for episode 1?
So for our first episode, we've got the 2018 opus, The Bronze Age Mindset, by who I'm assuming to be the pseudonymously named Bronze Age Pervert.
Yes, an instant classic.
Look, it's actually sold better than I would have expected. So it's an ebook. I've got it on Kindle. Yep. I'm assuming you have the same.
Wait, how much did we pay for this book? Paid
it was $11 Australian for me, I think.
Yes.
Yes.
So we gave this man. We've supported this young, fine gentleman with 24 Australian dollars.
Yeah. So who is Bronze Age Pervert? It's unclear. Online, I found a few potential real people who might be Bronze Age Pervert.
Oh, really?
Including a Romanian-American academic at Yale, but none of these are verified. He does have, or did have, a Twitter account, now banned, where he claimed to be an amateur nudist bodybuilder, mostly posting pictures of bodybuilders, of aesthetic physiques, and the relevance of that will become evident later. It's philosophically relevant in the context of the Bronze Age mindset.
This is philosophically relevant. And do you think there's much, I guess we can get into it later, to the details, but much credibility to the claim that he's an academic at, Stanford or whatever?
I have no fucking idea. I don't know how I would work this out. I suppose you could try to find videos of this particular academic and compare it to Bronze Age Pervert's podcast, because he does have a podcast. It's Caribbean Rhythms with Bronze Age Pervert. In addition, he does have a Telegram group. So he got banned from Twitter. I'm not sure if the Telegram group was being run contemporaneously with his Twitter account, but his Telegram account is still live. It's got,
and should we
almost 15,500 subs. So clearly he has an audience. How many of those are active, I'm not quite sure, but he's obscure, but he is making this work. There are people listening beyond the two of us.
Yeah, he also has a Gumtree where he sells I think
is it a Gumroad? I hadn't heard.
Sorry, not a Gumtree. Yeah, Gumroad. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I hadn't heard of this previously.
Yeah. So it's like an internet marketplace for creators to sell stuff directly to their audience. He has 1,400 ratings and a 5.0 out of 5. And the minimum monthly contribution is $5, and you can make a yearly contribution of $50. So
you need to contribute to rate?
I think, I believe that's how Gumroad works. Yeah.
So, I mean, you have to respect the guy for making this work. He might be making a reasonable amount of money for this, which we too have contributed to.
Yes. Well, okay. So another one of his stats is back to the Bronze Age mindset. He has 1,000, as of the recording of this podcast, he has 1,074 ratings. His rating is 4.6 out of 5 stars with an 82% 5-star rating for Bronze Age. And it's $12 a pop and 12 Australian dollars. So if 10%, and look, the numbers, the estimates for the number of people who give a rating for a Kindle book is between 5 and 10%. So if 10% of the people who bought his book actually gave a rating, then he sold 10,000 copies of this thing at $12 each. So he made $100,000 on it.
I've made so many poor decisions in my life. This much is becoming evident. If I could have made way more money by writing The Bronze Age Mindset and becoming the Bronze Age pervert.
Why did I spend all those years getting a higher education when I could have just read Nietzsche?
Look, you can pick between student debt or becoming the pervert of your historical age of choice. Him.
Becoming a pirate king.
after hyping this book up this much, how about we start discussing it?
Yeah, I think just before we move on, like to give some weird amount of credit before we get into the book, like he is definitely probably making a living out of what he's doing, and that on that level is like quite. He knows his audience, and he's making it work.
He's an entrepreneur. He identified a niche, identified an audience, identified a need, and filled it.
He is technically an entrepreneur. Yes,
a startup.
You know, Jack, there's only two types of people in this world. There's dogs and there's wolves. And he's a wolf.
I believe you mean frogmen and bugmen. To those who don't know,
let us enlighten you.
You'll be expert in Bronze Age pervert thought. So before we start discussing the book proper, how likely did you feel that this was a troll going into it?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I tried to. I thought he was being sincere. I looked at it. The blurb, as we'll read a bit of the blurb, is ridiculous, but funny. And I thought, no, I've been on bodybuilding.com. I know what I thought it was sincere. I was going in like actually reading like, okay, let's see what this guy's going to talk about, and I got a surprise. Really. What about you? What do you reckon before you opened it up?
I was leaning much more towards troll than I think you were. I read the blurb. It says something about Bronze Age pervert being suspected as Steve Bannon's insider in the White House, and I thought, no, this is very elaborate theatre. This is performance art.
That was maybe the line that like was suspicious.
It read too much like the sort of thing that I would find funny.
The last like few lines of the blurb are really good.
Having mentioned the blurb, I feel like we should probably read through it because it gives both an overview of the content of this book, but it also gives a fairly good overview of the tone, and it might clarify why I thought this was probably a troll. Quote, "The Atlantic named this author as possibly Steve Bannon's contact in the White House. In brackets, Rosie Gray, The Atlantic, February 10, 2017. Think you should speak directly to my WH cutout/cell leader," Yarvin said in an email. "I've never met him and don't know his identity. We just DM on Twitter. He's said to be very close to Bannon. Goal is to intimidate Congress with pure masculine show of youth, energy. Trump is said to know will coordinate with powerful EOs," end bracket. And a recent Vox article, in brackets, Tara Isabella Burton, Vox June 1, 2018, claimed that he is the text to Jordan Peterson's subtext and a distilled form of Peterson. Distilled means purer. Yes, so why not read and understand the purer version? T.I. Burton also adds in this article that the author Bronze Age pervert is a kind of priest king to thousands on Twitter and outsiders possibly leading a spiritual reawakening. Levi, would you like to continue or should I keep reading?
No, I'll take it.
You want to have a go? Thank you.
So, I'll relieve you of your duties. Some say that this book found in a safe box. Sorry, I can't give a straight face. Found in a safe box in the port area of Kowloon was dictated because Bronze Age pervert, capital B, capital A, capital P, refuses to learn
that goes without saying.
Quote unquote, the low and plebeian art of writing. It isn't known how this book was transcribed. The contents are pure dynamite, He explains that you live in an ant farm, that you are observed by the lords of lies, ritually probed. Ancient man had something you have lost, confidence in his instincts and strength, knowledge in his blood. BAP shows how the Bronze Age mindset can set you free from the iron prison and help you embark on the path of power. He talks about life, biology, hormones. He gives many examples from history, both ancient and modern, and he shows the secrets of the detrimental robots, how they hide and fabricate. He helps you escape gynocracy and ascend to fresh mountain air. Should we finish it off? The pricing he insisted on against all advice. So the pricing, presumably in American, is $6.69. The pricing he insisted on against all advice, it refers to the lucky 969 movement of Burma, led by the noble monk Wirathu. Praise be to the pervert. Praise be to this teaching of his peace. Be careful.
Right. So that's actually a reasonable encapsulation of the book, including some of his oddities of prose. Have you noticed he doesn't use articles fairly regularly?
Yes. And I thought, at first I thought, so I guess we'll read some quotes, but at first I thought he was putting on like a show, like like I'm a Bronze Age, like, you know,
Yeah.
BAP, pick up deer,
Big rock.
carcass, yeah, big rock, and, you know, take woman. But I think maybe after listening to his podcast a little bit, that potentially it might just be like his English isn't. I don't know.
Yeah, my first impression was that he might be a non-native speaker of English and spoke a language which didn't have articles, and so had trouble with that, like, say, a Slavic language. If he is Romanian, then that won't be the case because it's a Romance language. But
I think maybe,
but
it wasn't. I think he did do some of the like the Stone Age way of speaking a bit. But then maybe it's also not his first language. Like, English is clearly not his first language. After, you know, he's actually a fairly good speaker. Actually, I think. But like, you know,
I enjoyed the prose because it's very odd. It's the combination of some grammatical errors and his tendency to spell words in a really strange way. You know, attack spelt with a Q.
I enjoyed that, actually.
Hormones spelt like WHOREMOANS. He has a lot of things like this where he'll spell something in an intentionally unusual way.
Yeah.
Whether it's trying to convey a message or not is often unclear, but I did enjoy the oddity of it.
He did some things were like tropes, like human, like HUE.
Yeah, human, like HUE.
Human. Yeah. And then some things were really inconsistent. And then he also had outbursts. Anyways, we're starting to get into the weeds. let's kind of, you know, step back, get the bigger picture. Hey, that's the blurb. That's I think Jack and I are actually coming into this like fairly as friendly as we can. I think.
I have an open mind. There were parts of it that I liked.
That you strongly agreed with? In fact, I'm pretty sure you rang me when you finished reading the book and you just said, I loved it. I loved every word of it. I agree with it 100%.
So we've discussed a lot of stuff around the book. Let's actually discuss the book itself now. And I think a good place to start is to start with Bronze Age Pervert's first principles, because from those you can then understand his concepts of civilization, civilizational decline, how we get out of it, what the ideal man is, the problem with women, all sorts of stuff like that can be best understood within the context of his foundational principles. So, Levi, there are a few themes that he regularly returns to, some of which were discussed at the beginning of the book, many of which just pop up seemingly randomly. And I think it'll make much more sense if we can gather those things together before we go on to discussing some of his more concrete views of civilization. and gender relations, race relations, all the good stuff.
Ethnic purity. Yes.
So, I mean, one important thing that he talks about a lot is space. I mean, his idea of space is really central to all sorts of things, say, central to nobility, central to the development of a good person versus the development of a bug man, which is a pejorative term of his that describes a certain type of modern human who's servile, submissive, buys into big science, buys into nerdish thought.
The yeast people.
Yeast mode of existence, the existence for existence's sake. And a lot of this can come back to his conception of space, which is quite expansive, no pun intended. So noble animals need space physically, and they need to spread out and dominate space, but they also need to do so within a mental space. They need space that's not impinged on by power structures or a gynocracy or an overbearing government, within which they can develop their own ethics and their own view of the world, their own appreciation of beauty.
Yes.
What was your take on his view of space? I thought it was really important.
Yeah, I think, going back to the plot about the claim being a pure distilled version of Peterson, he potentially, insofar as your physical environment is a reflection of or can actually shape your psychology. Yeah, he basically, I don't know how to explain it other than to say it comes through in everything. So he likes his personal space. He thinks young men should have the space to grow, I suppose, into their masculinity, and space in terms of for example, cities versus the Mongolian steppe. Or
the open sea.
Or the open sea. It's quite foundational, and it's hard to, I suppose space is such a broad concept that it affects a lot of his views about everything, essentially. Is absolutely the foundation, one of the foundational concepts.
Yeah, and it's in a foundational philosophical sense, it's very important to him. But even on a personal level, he's got this thing about people sitting next to him in empty restaurants and people eating with their mouths open too close to him. And both of those things can be related to his love of space as well. Additionally, say different races have different requirements for space, and that is a direct reflection of how noble that race is. So in his view, East Asians have a very low space requirement. Africans have a bit more, and whites have the greatest requirement of space. And that is directly equivalent to how noble those races are. Whites are the most noble, in part because of their large requirement for space.
Yeah. Maybe a quote. But rarely do I feel angrier as a violation of my privacy than if I eat in a restaurant alone and someone comes to sit right next to me when the whole place is empty. Vilest of all is when a group of something, I think were subcons or Han, I assume that's some sort of racial epithet, came and sat just by me in an entirely empty restaurant and started to eat with mouths open.
Yeah, I remember that part because that was after this anecdote that he was giving about how he was at the gym or just after having worked out, and a Chad was feeling him up because they thought that he'd stolen their wallet or something. And that violation of space wasn't what offended him. And perhaps that ties into his respect for masculinity that we'll discuss later. Maybe the Chad was invading his space in a more masculine way.
Yes.
Than the people who were eating with their mouths open beside him in a restaurant.
I think that there was a quote, if I remember correctly, about claustrophobia being the noblest of phobias.
Yeah, there was a real nobility there.
I think that really gets the point across.
Yeah, so we've gone over space, and I'm sure we'll incidentally also be discussing his conception of space later because it ties into so many things. This is a really foundational principle of Mr. Pervert's. what about will? He's got this idea of will as this universal force, somewhat like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, both of whom he obviously really likes.
Like will to, like, because Nietzsche, for example, is like will to power, or like Schopenhauer is like the will to life. So what exactly is Bronze Age? The will to expand territory, expand into space, procreate. Do you want to expand on it a little bit?
Yeah, so there's the aspect of expanding in space, which, procreation is an aspect of that. But he seems to view the will as something more foundational, like a fundamental aspect of the universe. He describes will as this primordial force that seeks to arrange itself into increasingly stranger shapes. And it expresses itself in different ways, in different contexts. Saliently in the context of biology, it seeks to produce more and more perfect specimens.
Yeah.
Which in the realm of science, it seeks to, or I should qualify that as true science, capital S science.
Yeah.
It seeks to uncover or reveal the correct hierarchy of virtues, the correct hierarchy of people, of animals, and so on.
Yes.
And it exercises these roles in various ways. So one thing, and this relates to his views of civilization, one way that the will exerts its power is by culling less capable animals. So when he talks about how when a population, I think he was talking about when a population of fish or some animals living in a pond, when their numbers grow too great, when the population increases too much, there's too much detritus and trash, as he refers to the weaker members of the population. When that grows too great, there will come about a particularly large or particularly vigorous monster that will just kill a bunch of the less worthwhile life forms in that pond or that lake, or whichever biome you're discussing. And that's sort of how the will the will culls away the less worthy.
He does reference. He clearly, that's one of the other people he likes. He clearly is informed by H.P. Lovecraft, and I believe he actually explicitly talks of. He explicitly name drops Nyarlathotep, one of the eldritch.
Nyarlathotep, or however you meant to say it.
Yeah, the eldritch.
Something in an eldritch tongue that makes you go insane if you hear it properly.
So he clearly likes the idea of cleansing. Yes. So
he likes the will's purgative function.
And the will is like it's not inherently about, like, for example, like Schopenhauer talks about the will to life and kind of like the drive to like create the next generation or whatever, and there's this part in Bronze Age mindset where he talks about the distinction between a chimp in the zoo and a chimp in the wild. Do we want to unpack that?
I think let's go and talk about masturbating chimps. I think it's important.
This is clearly
one of the enduring mysteries of the universe, why chimps in captivity masturbate, and I think Bronze Age mindset might have
figured it out.
Rest.
So one of his key arguments, or an argument early in the book about space, it relates to space. So chimps in captivity, it relates to sexuality, and it relates to the will to life, or the will, and he basically makes this comparison between a chimpanzee in captivity will masturbate a lot, and whereas a chimp in the wild will not masturbate, and part of the reason why is the chimp in captivity has no ability to dominate or to control its space, and it knows that it is captive, and so it basically turns to masturbation.
He talked about the growing onanism of our society, and directly compares it to the caged chimpanzee, who on some level gives up and realizes that it lives in own space. It can't express.
Oh, that's right. He calls it own space. Yeah.
So
that's a really key term.
It
own
starts
space,
masturbating. And in the context of our society, he feels that that's because our hidden masters try to normalize vice and titillate us with hollow sexual imagery to keep us drained of sexual energy and this drive to dominate.
One of his comparisons, he spends quite a while talking about teenage boys and the development of their sexuality.
Yeah, aesthetic youths.
And how I think we can unpack it a little bit later when he talks about his views on women and gynocracy and stuff. But the chimp also relates to teenage boys who are growing up in, say, industrial education systems where they're in a high school or whatever, and they know subconsciously that they're in own space, and it leads to the malformation, shall we say, of their masculine development, much like the chimp.
And
I don't know if I agree with his conclusions about the consequences of what a teenage boy growing up in a high school, as we can talk later, what that leads to. But I do agree that this is one of the things about the book. I in a weird way, I see where he's coming from. Teenage boys and chimps shouldn't be locked in cages, and insofar as a high school is a cage, so I can see why he doesn't I agree with him. Yeah, high school suck, and chimps being in cages suck, and clearly. I assume chimps. I assume, if for nothing else than boredom, chimps in the wild probably don't masturbate as much as chimps in a cage.
Yeah, so I like your Straussian approach to reading Bronze Age mindset. Try to understand where the author is coming from. I think masturbating chimps ties quite nicely into another one of his first principles, is his problem with Darwinism. So he takes exception with evolution by natural selection fairly fundamentally, for reasons of his belief in the will as this universal force, and also his belief in the necessity of space. So fundamentally, he thinks that life for life's sake, or the view of living for life's sake, is wrong. In some way, degenerate, which is where I think he does diverge from Schopenhauer's view of the will to live.
Yes,
because
I think it's quite a
very
Nietzschean.
Much this will to continue living for life. He views true life or uncorrupted life as living without, he calls it the gravity of necessity. So you live a life without the gravity of necessity in your own space, not in owned space, in your own space, where you can develop your, he says you develop your claws if nature has given you any. It's within that sort of free environment that noble creatures can self-develop. He takes real exception to the idea that Darwin adduced, and people before Darwin also discussed, that it is based on struggle that you get evolution. You have some sort of evolutionary pressure.
Yeah.
And then the animals that have some particular adaptation to that are more likely to reproduce, more likely to continue their line than those that don't. He So he strangely at the same time disputes this. He says that life doesn't operate this way. But then he also goes on to say that that Darwinist conception of selection is trivially true. He says, of course, those that don't die out then reproduce. He also actually makes a number of other fairly, to my mind, Darwinist assertions. So he talks about how noble creatures prefer death to captivity or death to living in owned space. And if there aren't enough free spaces, they die out. I thought that was actually a very Darwinist thing to say. But this will be an ongoing theme that he's not totally consistent in what he
kind
says.
Of picks and chooses a little bit. So one of the things I did want to mention is that this is definitely where sort of his Nietzschean influence, like he loves Nietzsche. Like I would say that.
He's definitely simping hard for Nietzsche.
He's simping so hard for Nietzsche. Like one for historical context, Nietzsche was not a fan of Darwin at his time, and whether or not Nietzsche ever actually read The Origin of Species or directly communicated with Darwin is a different issue. But from what we can tell from Nietzsche's writings, what he was exposed to of Darwinian theory at the time, he was not a fan of. And secondly, I think Bronze Age is clearly so one of the things that I like about the pervert, Mr. Pervert, is that he is picking up Nietzsche's philosophies about not merely living life. Nietzsche has this kind of idea ultimately of I guess kind of like a fairly simple modern way of putting it is like living life to the fullest, and Bronze Age, in his own weird kind of bodybuilding.com sort of way, is, I guess, exposing, at least on some level, exposing his audience to the philosophy of Nietzsche, which is quite, credit where credit's due. I think that's good. And he's picked it up and he's ran with it. I don't know how Nietzsche would respond to Bronze Age himself, but I suppose he's definitely a disciple.
Yeah, it's sort of like reading Nietzsche drunk if the translator was Ziz, is sort of the experience of reading Bronze Age mindset.
Potentially, yeah, definitely he has bouts of being drunk. So I guess from the Darwin, his criticism of Darwin, to kind of keep on going on that point, is tied into his criticism, I suppose, of science in general, and how he never explains exactly what he considers true science, but he definitely does not appreciate the modern state of science, and how in his view it is, I suppose, not practiced properly. I suppose again, it's hard to say because he never actually says what he thinks is science, but he does talk a lot of crap about Darwin and other science.
Yeah, so I think we definitely should stay on the subject of Darwin and science for a while, because this is really important. It's also one of the weakest parts of the book. His criticisms don't really. They're either incoherent or based on fairly outdated information. So I think it's a sentence in the book where he actually talks about what true science is, or at least a function of true science, which is to find the hierarchy of beliefs, of better and better beliefs, and the hierarchy of better and better creatures, biological creatures, within which you would find the hierarchy of human beings. We've discussed this problem with Darwin in that Darwin talks about the need for life's sake, or that life is fundamentally a state of trying to exist and reproduce, which he doesn't agree with. He also dislikes Darwin, but almost from an argument from authority by invoking Nietzsche. So Nietzsche, I'm pretty sure he was paraphrasing Nietzsche from Beyond Good and Evil, where Nietzsche calls Darwin sort of a petty collector of facts that he puts together and makes cockamamie theories out of. And he couples this with discussing physicists and chemists, and he says that better minds go into physics and chemistry. Nietzsche, when he was describing Darwin as this petty collector of facts, at least in my reading, was describing really all scientists in that way. I don't think he was particularly singling out Darwinists, which makes that argument from authority a bit shaky, considering that I don't think Nietzsche was actually saying what Bronze Age pervert is ascribing to him. He has a very... So his idea of how you should carry out science is to just observe without any preconceptions. So he talks about how we should, the best way, say, to study animal behaviour is to have a device that allows monitoring of, say, an animal's internal state remotely without interacting with the animal, which is a fairly difficult engineering problem. But, so supposing we had this sort of device, he says that we should just hit record, start observing the animal, and from that really develop predictive models, something that will allow us to predict what the animal will do and nothing else, which the fact that he so developing testable hypotheses to guide what sort of data you gather, so you can differentiate between signal and noise in data, and also the power of creating descriptive models rather than just predictive models of the world. He really doesn't view that as important either. And I think that's a fairly fundamental misunderstanding of what science should do and what good science entails. His approach to science, I just don't think would get us very far. And for someone who talks so much about the need for mastery over space, better science leads to better technology, which leads to better mastery over space. So I just don't think he's being completely consistent with his own stated beliefs while also not quite understanding how science is carried out today.
I think...
What were your thoughts on it?
In my view, I don't think that Mr. Pervert understands science. This is, he makes an argument about, just observing things. Again, as you say, about not imposing, I suppose, our a model or like not making any assumptions. But again, as you've already noted, like which pieces of data should we observe in the first place is itself a conjecture about what's important. And with regards to unless we just record all data about an organism without any interpretation or without any, prioritization or without asking questions about like, okay, well, what does X mean in the context of this animal's life or whatever? He clearly, I don't know where he's gotten this, because it's not clear to me that he got this from nature, this idea from nature. I don't know why he thinks this. He doesn't really explain it. I'll just read a quick thing about this is more specifically about Darwin, but I think it might give you some sense of how he talks about just in general how he approaches the way that he treats his opposing, the people that he disagrees with. He doesn't necessarily give a very coherent refutation. So, nor do I believe in the quote-unquote miracle that modern science has invented that is hiding under the word quote-unquote random mutation and the hand-waving of quote-unquote incremental change. There is not enough time, emphasis, nor enough number of specimens, nor the kinds of, quote, mutations observed to support either natural selection or Lamarckism as explanations of evolution. Many of the mathematical models for how a trait will spread in a population have failed. They don't tell you this. They, I assume it's like just they. And like, I don't like... For example, when he says there's not enough time, it seems to me that 3.5 billion years from, or 3 to 4 billion years, let's call it, is quite a lot of time. And depending on the replication rate of a species, that can be a lot of generations. So he just kind of like asserts, he just asserts there isn't enough time and that there isn't enough specimens. And he doesn't sort of like expound on that or like explain his logic. He just sort of says there's not enough time. And he speaks like that quite often. He just says, no, that's just not the case, whatever person that he's disagreeing with. And I think that's how he sort of treats science. He just says like, these things are not science. And I'm just going to say like, no, there's not enough time or whatever. And it doesn't sort of like dive any deeper,
Yeah. And I think he does seem to get a bit confused about some theories. So it ties into that criticism you were discussing about how there's not enough time. He talks about how really evolution via natural selection, random mutations is too complex a theory, how you're just erecting this extremely convoluted framework to describe something like a bacterial flagellum evolving. And he compares it with something that he thinks is a better example of good science, of a simple explanatory model, which is the Ptolemaic system for describing the position of celestial bodies in the sky. And I think he's actually got it the wrong way around, because with, say, Darwinism, or what has evolved since, I think it was 1859 that The Origin of Species was published in. So additionally, Bronze Age Pervert's reading list is a bit out of date. Evolutionary science has moved on a bit since the mid-19th century. That is a theory that's actually very simple in its mechanism. I mean, you have a context within which certain species live. Depending on the particular abilities of a given member of the species, they will have more children on average than some other members who have less advantageous mutations leading to particular characteristics of them. Like that's actually a very simple mechanism. Just more competitive things generally will proliferate more than less competitive things. And it's
almost tautological to say that.
Yeah. It's so, it's sort of trivially true. It sounds trivially true. Like all really good ideas, once you hear them, you think, well, how could it have been otherwise? It's very obvious when someone tells you. But that's a very simple mechanism which leads to very complex emergent phenomena. From that, you do get, the human brain, you get the eye.
Flagellum.
As he discusses, a bacterial flagellum. Whereas the Ptolemaic system is actually a very complex mechanism, like the number of circles within circles within circles of orbits, because the circle was seen as more perfect than say an elliptical orbit, which was ultimately a much more simple mechanism that was worked out later. That's a much more complex mechanism used to describe more simple appearing phenomena. And I think he just doesn't appreciate the distinction between descriptive mechanism and the output of that mechanism.
Yeah, or what it's the complexity, or potentially emergent complexity of the system is describing. Yeah, I would say in my assessment that he, as you said, he's talking about, he's trying to refute ideas that are 150 years old and have been updated since. And even in the mention of Lamarck, like, you don't need to talk about Lamarck anymore. Like Lamarck gets 2 slides in a university biology course. Like it's not like that needs to be a point of contention. That's, modern biology has moved on from that. It's moved on.
Yeah, I mean, look, to an extent with epigenetic change, which could be heritable, Lamarckianism does have some, you could wrangle it to have some odd place, but broadly speaking, it's not.
Yeah, you could.
It's not really that important.
I personally think that Mr. Pervert he stopped reading after the sort of 19th century, except for reading Paglia. And then, so anyways.
What else? How about, so we've gone over space, we've gone over will, we've gone over science, we've gone over life to quite an extent. His belief in overpopulation, the need for overpopulated groups to be culled. We could touch on hormones briefly, actually, because while we're discussing Darwinism and life, he seems to think of hormones as the key to everything.
Yes, he's a big fan of. He's got some very, interesting views of hormones.
It's a combination of, so he doesn't like medical science for quite a number of reasons, for some legitimate reasons. So I mean, I think he gets wrong the fundamental mechanism of science, but he discusses some of the social problems or the problems of applications of medical science, saying that it's captured by, if not totally, then to a large extent by financial interest of prestige on behalf of, say, an organisation or an individual, and just individual biases. Of course, every scientist is human and will carry with them particular biases because that's unavoidable. I think he actually gets that criticism right, but he makes other criticisms saying that the reason why we haven't appreciated hormones as the foundational aspect of life is that, one, we can't have true science because women are in science and we need lactation rooms. We have scientific organisations tyrannised over by, I think it was by HR management cunts with fibromyalgia or something like that. Yes. It was a very memorable turn of phrase.
The corruption or the degradation of modern science in view of the gynocracy, which we will probably talk about next.
While we're on the topic of science, though, before we leave, and I said we were going to spend a while on this because it's really important, the role of reason. He's quite anti-enlightenment. You definitely get the impression that he's not. He shares a lot of Nietzsche's suspicions of the Enlightenment, and one of those is his view of reason. And he defines reason really as a way of communicating insights between people, not as a way of actually discovering something. And he views true discovery to be purely just sort of leaps of imagination, sudden insights that aren't well described. So he talks about geometry and how mathematicians will intuit something, or
the intuitionist argument,
and that formalization in language to transmit these ideas to other people is, in Bronze Age Pervert's view, what reason actually is. If you redefine reason to be a communicative device, then I suppose it's trivially true that it's not used to discover things. I would ask, though, I mean, if you have these sudden leaps of imagination and you don't subsequently interrogate them, you're not sure whether they're true or not, or I'm not sure how you know whether they're true or not. Seems to be an issue, or I would regard as an issue if we're trying to actually work anything out.
His epistemology is not clear. How do you make such a leap of imagination, and how do you determine that leap of imagination, as opposed to an alternative leap of imagination, is the correct? Because you can, the sensation of something being true, like eureka moment. There's plenty of people who've had eureka moments about some insight or supposed insight into the world, and they were wrong. And other people have some insight and they were right. he just kind of takes it. It's almost like it's almost an axiom that, okay, if you have this insight, this leap of imagination, then what is therefore it must be true. Otherwise, like, you wouldn't be having that.
Yeah, it's
that
almost
insight,
it's almost hashtag manifest. If you just believe something strongly enough.
I think it does, like, just broadly tie into that. He at times I'm just not clear enough exactly what he thinks, because he doesn't fully explain his line of reasoning. He takes a lot
I'm
of
not
things
sure
for
that
granted.
he knows fully what he thinks at times. I mean, when I was saying before that he's picked up a lot of Nietzsche's bad habits, this is definitely one of them. So with much of the time when you read Nietzsche, he just says something and doesn't really explain it. And if you agree with his first
Or takes it as assumed knowledge.
Yeah. And if you already agree with it, then you, by definition, you agree with it when he says it. If you don't, he doesn't really give you anything, and it's quite unsatisfying. And Bronze Age Pervert does more or less the same thing. And I think it's probably an intentional stylistic choice, given that he likes making those thunderous statements that Nietzsche makes.
Yeah, I think that, like, part of it might be that he wants to, like, he is emulating Nietzsche, and he does want to have this kind of, like, bravado to the way that he writes.
The thing is, when he writes, I think he's at his best when he's not aping Nietzsche, when he's using weird English, when he's spelling things weirdly, when he's telling strange stories. Like, that's when he's at his best.
Yeah.
When he's being Diet Nietzsche, he's much more boring.
Yeah, I agree. So
anyway, on the topic of reason, just the final thing I want to say is how he talks about reason as this way of communicating ideas, but then undermines it further by saying that the underlying biology of each individual is too different to really accept these ideas from someone else. He, at the start of the book, talks about, I think it's people jizzing in each other's minds. A fairly pungent illustration of this idea that you can't really understand other people's ideas. It's this foreign thing that doesn't belong. Brings up Nietzsche again. He says that Nietzsche avoided reading other people's books so that it wouldn't corrupt his own mind with what Bronze Age Pervert describes as these foreign thoughts that you can't understand. Nietzsche was a professor of philology, I think, in Basel. And perhaps I'm wrong.
No, you broke up.
Anything else you want to add on reason/science/Darwinism? We covered a fair bit of territory there.
I think, okay, so let's just recap. So you talked about space and the need for an animal to have space, especially like a human, especially a man or a boy. We spoke about his view of biology and Darwinism and science. And we've touched on his ideas of reason and his idea of the will. Do you think that's enough foreground to move on to the kind of core idea around his political philosophy of the gynocracy?
Yeah, I reckon next we should definitely discuss modern society and its problems, which will lead us on to women, because they really seem to be the problem.
So what we're going to do is basically check in about whether or not we think, given what we've spoken about so far, is this a troll? Or how likely is this to be a troll? And given what we've read so far, I think the way that we've tried to relay his thoughts, and I think given how much, so from my perspective, I think given how much effort, I think he's clearly put in a lot of effort to his thinking, even if at times he is largely mimicking Nietzsche. That I don't think he's trolling, given what I think he's really sincere.
At this point in my reading, I was still unsure as to whether this was sincere or a high effort troll. So clearly this is high effort. This isn't, just talking shit on Twitter or something like that.
Yeah,
this guy's
he's put a lot of work into this book. Yeah.
But I, at this stage, was still unsure whether this was a sincere attempt to convey genuine beliefs or a high effort troll that probably contains some of his beliefs, but isn't totally representative.
And if you were trolling,
well, there was one line that probably made things even less clear to me. He has this part where he says that he's not being ironic because he doesn't understand irony. And yet maybe this reflects the fact that I'm a millennial and I'm buried under so many levels of irony that I don't even know my own name anymore. But I don't know if that's a joke or not. Like, if he's saying that to say, no, I'm totally sincere, or if he's saying it to wink at the reader and say, nothing I say is true, or I am being completely disingenuous. At this point, I wasn't sure if it was 50-50 on whether this guy is sincere. Or
I think he takes himself really seriously. I think he takes himself really seriously. That's the thing. Like when he says, "I don't understand irony," I half think maybe he's being a little bit hyperbolic, but I think he might be being serious.
It's sort of an "I am not a man, I am dynamite" Nietzsche statement.
And I would double down that, given what the YouTube and the what's his podcast called?
Caribbean Rhythms with Bronze Age.
Yeah. Although even that title is such a trolly title.
You see?
But then you listen to it and he sounds like totally fucking sincere.
Well, this is why people like us need to exist, and why Pose Law Podcast needs to exist. Someone needs to unpack anthropologists.
So these are the big questions. Okay, so all right, so far Levi is pretty convinced. Levi am pretty convinced that that he's sincere. I think a bit hyperbolic, inspired by Nietzsche, but largely sincere. But Jack, you're a bit more ambivalent about the situation. Yeah. All right. So should we move on?
Let's talk about civilization as it exists at the moment, men and women.
Oh, we're starting to get into the good shit now.
How would you characterize Bronze Age perverts' view of how civilization exists at the moment?
Accurate. Accurate. An accurate diagnosis of this situation that we're in right now.
Onanistic, gynocratic, gerontocratic hellhole.
Sclerotic. Lactating and sclerotic society we live in. Okay, so no, without taking the piss too much. Okay, we certainly have some issues, and there are certainly aspects of masculinity that are not so crash hot right now in the society. You know, like porn. A really big example would be like rates of porn addiction and stuff. You know, that's crazy.
The masturbating chimpanzee.
The masturbating chimps, right? And there's, have you seen the Shy Lazy Boys in China? Is it? No, the Tired Lazy Boys, man. You got to check this stuff out. Like, I think it's in China or it's in Japan, maybe, or South Korea. They have like a class or they call these young men the equivalent of roughly tired lazy boys, and I'm sure you would have met them in high school. They're the sort of 15 to early 20-year-old who is kind of lazy, nihilistic, sort of doesn't really want to do anything, doesn't really want to engage in anything, kind of largely wants to just play video games. And that is a part of, apparently it's a big enough part of society to give them a name, tired lazy boys. And I know exactly what people mean when they say tired lazy boys. But in his view, it seems to be much deeper than, we've got a bit of porn addiction and we've got like some guys that are not like taking control of their lives and stuff.
Yeah, well, it seems in his mind to be a result of a concerted effort, both a reversion to the historical mean of tired, decadent, yeast-like, he often describes it as, societies. He often brings up matriarchy as a common state of civilization. So it's both a reversion to historical meaning, but also engineered by a group of people. He calls them spooks, but we don't actually know who they are. But they're not, sort of the World Economic Forum crowd, the obvious face of it, politicians, financiers, captains of industry. There's a group of people behind those people, and they're the ones who are really driving this gynocratic, yeast-like hellscape that we currently live in.
Yeah, the shadow, like, the master of shadows, master of slaves, even behind the political veneer, there's like some deeper level, that is conspiratorial thinking, but he never actually brings up like an explicit, like, for example, it's skull and crossbones, or it's like, it's this, the Illuminati. I don't even think he says like any of those words at all. Like, he just kind of alludes that there's like some sort of force behind even like, what's happening at a political level.
Yeah, well, he describes politics at the moment as really a diversion. So this is something I agree with. He brings up this idea of a marionette show and dividing everything into two camps. So he says, an average person is presented with this marionette show, two different characters. I'm assuming he's speaking mostly from an American perspective, or at least in the context
I think it's
conservatives and liberals, saying that you're only allowed to agree with one or the other, and that there isn't a spectrum of belief between those two groups. It's really binary. Yeah. It's either you are conservative or you're liberal. And I broadly agree with that. I think on the whole, we're told that we're only allowed two options, and quite a lot of the time we take the bait, and that does limit thought. So I think that was actually that was a place where he hit the nail on the head. When he gets away from Nietzsche, I really enjoy how he writes. I mean, he was talking about fat, balding conservatives fist fighting with women with mullets and strong forearms who drive pickup trucks as effectively the state of
the
politics
mammies.
in America. And it was something like the effeminate, long-faced trans new male of the left or something like that. Yeah, so he views politics, or at least the visible aspect of politics, as a side show used to distract us. We've got this political theatre that is used to disguise what he talks about as the Leviathan, which it's not that well defined, but I gather it's a description of these more hidden forces which are oppressing young men and oppressing the vigour of youth, promoting an old sclerotic leadership and domination by women, and the prevention of real science in favour of scientism and fake science, and trying to hold back our return to a time more like the Bronze Age, when we had real men, we had real heroes and things like that. So
I wonder if he's read Chomsky. I think he probably would agree with manufacturing consent, I reckon. And I'm surprised. The thing is, I think if he had read manufacturing consent, he probably would have referenced it directly. So
you're right. There are definitely at least echoes of manufacturing consent. If he hasn't read it specifically, then
he'd probably like it. He should probably go read it. Give him some more fodder.
Yeah.
He doesn't. So society, the world as it is right now, doesn't like youthfulness. At least not male youthfulness. It doesn't like the potential strength of young men, especially young men with strong friendships, which we can talk about more later. It's almost like a hostility towards, for example, like the conversation around, like toxic masculinity. I think this book was written in 2018, right?
I think so.
2018. So he definitely has heard that conversation taking place.
Yeah, so he's probably, you know, like in a weird way, like this is somewhat of like I can imagine that this would be somewhat of a reaction to broader societal conversations around like quote unquote toxic masculinity. And it's almost like the sort of the most extreme counter narrative to the toxic masculinity narrative. Which in a way, like I can see why a lot of men, a lot of young men, would be alienated by these, in particular hyper left conversations around toxic masculinity and constant demonization of men, you know, not having a space for like, well, what's a positive male role model, or whatever. But then that kind of infers a deep level of, I suppose, intentionality about what's happening. That there's that's intentional. That there's a force or a group of people that are actively eroding and actively want to suppress young male vigor in order to like control the population, basically. Am I accurately representing?
Yeah, I think, and we should discuss, you know, what we've discussed the mask of modernity, you know, our sham political system or the political theatre. We should discuss what's going on in the background, but what is driving it? It does seem to be multifactorial.
Yeah.
I think he definitely does believe there is some organised force behind it all.
Yeah.
The spooks, you know, whose names we don't know. We don't know if they represent anyone themselves. All we do know is that they want to continue just accruing a power that we don't have. They want to continue owning a space, in a sense, which does bring up the question, you know, why does he regard that as bad? I mean, these are people who clearly are dominating space and are very powerful.
Yes.
But he seems to regard that as negative. I'm not entirely clear why.
Well, somebody's one.
It's exactly the sort of thing he's into. But
yeah. But presumably
anyway,
they're gynocratic. So
yeah, but I'm not sure if they're gynocratic or not, because this is part of Leviathan is a confluence of interests. So you've got the spooks, right? Then you've got a society, you know, based on agriculture. So agriculture leads to an increase in population. An increase in population leads to more human detritus. It leads to more bad. We got less high quality people who want to be dominated and they want to submit. At the same time, you've got, and now I'm unclear because he talks about, and we'll get into women, you've got the massive people who are overpopulating because of agriculture and civilization, and they are now protected and they're not as easily preyed upon. And they like the state of affairs, or somewhat like the state of affairs at the moment, because it's safer for them, it's more comfortable, and they're protected from, you know, superior specimens, from great men.
Yes.
Then another pillar whose interests are also driving that is that of women. So he talks about how women instinctively find men who are ascending and pull them back. In the section on masturbating chimpanzees, he mentioned that when a woman can sense when a man is leaving this onanistic existence, and she pulls him back. To masturbating in this abstract cage, or this figurative cage. So women are another pillar who are driving the oppression of young aesthetic men. We'll get into why why I don't think that's totally consistent with other things he says, because he also talks about how women like to submit.
Yeah.
We'll discuss that further. Do you have any other groups apart from the spooks, women, and the massive lower quality humans who are driving the Leviathan?
Homosexual men. And I think he doesn't really go into too much detail, but presumably it's also related to transgenderism. But
but he has this narrative, this interesting narrative. Also, one of the consequences of the gynocracy is I can't believe I'm saying this right now. It's totally ridiculous. One of the consequences of the gynocracy, and one of the consequences of of boys growing up in an owned space that is owned and controlled and dominated by others, is that it leads to, and I mentioned this earlier, but it leads to a corruption of male sexuality and development, and in its extreme. So the logic, the narrative goes roughly, and it's kind of a Freudian. He's obviously inspired by the sort of psychoanalysts, because he goes full armchair psychologist and talks about how basically like young men know subconsciously that they are growing up in owned space. And so they, I suppose, instead of overcoming that obstacle, and developing into their sort of greatest selves, their sexuality becomes not perverted, but like corrupted, I suppose. And that leads them to somehow becoming gay. It's not like, obviously it was totally incoherent narrative. It's like, and it doesn't make any sense at all. But roughly speaking, young boy grows up in own space, knows that he can't really control and dominate space around him, and then AB, like something becomes gay.
Yeah, so from my reading of what
the gynocracy,
I reckon this will dovetail nicely into talking about men, because we're going to need to talk about men and women in order to understand why our society is the pile of yeast that it is, infected with bug thought. So in my reading of why the gynocracy turns men gay is that, so when you have a particularly sensitive, so it's a true trend.
Oh yes, that's right. So you've got
sensitive youths. You've got the sort of boys who could grow up to become great men. These are the people who should grow up to truly oppose gynocracy. But you've got these sensitive boys who feel or who intuit, because they are so sensitive, that they live in own space and they can't express their masculinity. They're living under a weight of struggle. There's struggle with a society that doesn't want them to self-actualize. And then at the same time, they see their contemporaries. They see other boys expressing what Professor Pervert regards as a coarse masculinity, and they're repulsed by that, because on some level they understand what true masculinity is, despite not being able to fully express it. So they turn away.
He's not.
Men.
Yeah, the sort of horseplay. Like obnoxious sort of masculinity. Yeah.
So they turn away from other men, get closer to their mothers, and then when they hit puberty, develop a sex drive. They start eroticizing this thing that repulses them, which is other men. They become gay, and then because of the LGBT movement, they become the foot soldiers of the Leviathan. Yeah. So he talks about how these people should be the people who are most able to fight against it. They have the greatest interest in overturning this regime, except instead they become its lieutenants. And some of the most capable and vicious lieutenants, although not as capable as lesbians.
No, or the new male.
Yeah, well, he doesn't think much of new males. He thinks that they're easily bought off with a girlfriend and easily controlled. He does seem quite nervous about lesbians, though. He talks about, lesbian commissars will be running extermination camps and things like that. The most vicious enforcers of the regime.
Interracial lesbian commissars.
Like, he doesn't. He doesn't have a theory about how lesbians. Yeah, he doesn't offer a theory as to how lesbians come about. So I'm waiting for Bronze Age mindset
That's a good point.
to
He doesn't
set the record straight on that.
He doesn't explain lesbianism, actually. Yeah, interesting. Anyways, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been discussing how gay men come about. That probably ties nicely into discussing men fundamentally, you know, and why our society wants to suppress particularly young aesthetic men.
Yes.
Men who would become Ziz.
Yes. Who otherwise would have become Ziz. Because really, like, look at Ziz. Just, you know, Ziz is a great example because he, you know, look at when he was growing up, you know, he's like twig, right? You know?
Yeah.
And then, you know, by the time he was like 24 or whatever, did he even make 24? I don't know.
I think like he was 22 or something when he died, but
okay. So by the time he was 20, he's you know, 6'2", shredded and jacked, right? And signing all sorts of body parts, you know, and jacuzzis in Thailand. Like, the guy was a specimen, if there ever was one.
The king of aesthetics.
You know, so Ziz arguably was quite a sensitive young man, youth, and, you know, in a different world, Ziz, you know, became a homosexual. But we live in the part of the quantum multiverse in which Ziz, you know, attained his true greatness. Whereas
he didn't become PM of Australia, though, so it is still an imperfect world.
He didn't have time to flourish and become a true pirate king. No. I
should add, I'm not being disingenuous here. I unironically really like Ziz.
He's very charismatic.
But he is a good example of, you know, a story of self-overcoming, you know, as well as you can given the parlous circumstances for young aesthetic men. Because according to Chestbra, his brother, you know, Ziz was always insecure growing up. You know, he was weedy as anything in high school, but he overcame that, became jacked, had the body of Zeus, and inspired a generation of young bodybuilders.
Quite incredible, really. It's a true inspiration. It's
a true inspiration. If only I lived in Sydney and I could have witnessed it firsthand. So, men in society, what do men want to do if they're not obstructed by living in owned space, by living in overpopulated cities, which are, you know, in Bronze Age Pervert's description, sort of the Oriental type of civilization, you know, overpopulated. He calls it yeast or blob mode. What do men do when they're not living in this sort of civilization?
Conquer. Really. And I think in particular able to define, and I think, again, this goes back to, probably is inspired by Nietzsche and, you know, probably, I assume, beyond good and evil, they're able to, I suppose, live life on their terms, like define their own rules. And, you know, a really key example of this being, like, he has a section where he talks about, like, Blackbeard. It doesn't matter if he was a murderer. Like, the fact is, like, you're just talking about him today and look at how much he achieved. And it's those sorts of the pirate kings, or like the Greek heroes of old, or the Cortez. Again, another person like Cortez. They're adventurers. They'd go out on grand adventures and they would conquer and they'd you know, dominate space. And
and this is all motivated by an excess of being. I mean, they're not looking for
they're not really doing it for material gain per se.
Or
like, they're not trying to get
or
rich
anything
off,
like that.
They're doing it for well, I think this goes back to the will, like the will to life. It's this ascension. It's almost like an ascension or a transcendence.
Well, it's what we mentioned with the will, how it's always striving, you know, reaching and forming more and more perfect forms. He talks about it, you know, reaching for greater differentiation and complexity.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we in terms of, you know, men acting,
your brain just went into overdrive just then for a second.
What happened?
Like the look on your face is just like, you're like, okay, all right, we gotta like synthesize this person's perspective.
I'm working really hard.
Working on overdrive right now. Without
I'm
just
trying to make
talking
this,
shit.
I'm trying to make this as coherent as possible, but he doesn't make it easy for you.
We should say as a caveat the guy that we're synthesizing, we're trying to make coherent this person's point of view, who seemed to actively go out of his way to make it as difficult to comprehend and not out of some grand intellect or something. It was just incoherent. So we're doing our best.
Even under the most propitious circumstances, most men aren't great men.
Yeah,
I mean, say you look at Pericles in Athens, most people there weren't great men, but there weren't as many of them because they weren't being supported by the Leviathan and by technology as exists today. And their culture was more permissive of great men who kept the numbers of non-great men lower.
Yes, so he liked the Spartans.
I think a good way to talk about his view of what great men are or what true masculinity is by using a few examples of great men that he puts forward.
I'm getting one. Yeah.
Yeah, Periander of Corinth.
Periander.
So why is Periander?
Now, if I remember correctly, Periander
distillation of masculinity
was the king of Corinth, was it? And he in his kingdom or on his island in the Mediterranean or whatever, castrated, turned into eunuchs.
No, it was a nearby island. He had all of the men castrated because he's acting from an overflowing of being.
Yes, from overflowing of being. So he had them all castrated.
And he's not looking for praise for this. This is all just self-actualization.
And there were claims of him being mad, which he probably was. But that's beside the point. It doesn't matter if he was a madman, a mad king. He self-actualized. There were no rules constraining his wanton domination of space around him, including of, in this case, the testicles of other men.
Mm-hmm. He gave into his vices, or didn't give into them, but just lived them, which is something that Bronze Age pervert. In the section when he was discussing Periander of Corinth, giving into his vices, he seemed to be saying he was praising him. He was talking about how it was good that he raped his mother, had sex with his wife's corpse, castrated a bunch of men, but at the same time was a patron of the arts, built up civil society in the middle class of Corinth, but not from a sense of duty or a sense of needing to protect those weaker than him. It was fulfilling his will, living in accordance with it. Another example he gives of someone who is a great man was, I think it was Pietro di Alvaro, one of Cortez's lieutenants, his right-hand man, who in Latin America was the thing about him that Bronze Age pervert seems to admire was how his purpose was. So he was given some parcel of land. I'm not sure where in Latin America it was, or in now Latin America. He had no interest in governing it. He just went further on and kept killing people and dominating. And then whenever he conquered a new tract of land, he didn't bother governing that. He just kept going. So that is him following his innate desires.
Yeah,
and that's that is the essence of masculinity. Following your desires.
I think that sums it up.
Not for material gain, just because you want it.
Anyway, so those are a couple of examples of true higher men.
Mm-hmm. The problem is though he does of masculinity or describe masculinity, which conflicts with this view of great men just expressing themselves without caring about what other people think or without looking for the praise of others, without caring for conventional morality of others and things like that. So in one instance, he brings up Heraclitus saying that, what great men should aim for is the everlasting praise of mortals. But to me, really anything else except looking for praise. I mean, to be worshipped or to be praised by mortals forever, I mean, that very much is looking for gratification in others. I mean, I'm not sure how you can describe it in any other way. And that struck me as inconsistent, and I don't think he's making a subtle point of this. I think he is just saying two contradictory things.
Yeah.
He also talks about how real warriors are taken advantage of in our society because they have such a deep sense of responsibility and duty, except he seemed to be saying that in the context of them having a responsibility or a sense of responsibility and duty to others. Because if they purely had a sense of duty to themselves and only to themselves, then, the teaching of the gynocracy telling them that they need to care for others wouldn't affect them.
Yes.
So his views on what constitutes, essential or unbridled masculinity largely consistent, but not wholly.
No. What about his views on women?
Yeah, let's discuss women. They're a big problem in Bronze Age Pervert's view. Levi, what do you think of women?
Well, yeah, with them. I better be careful what I say here. I don't want the Gestapo coming around.
The mulleted women with strong forearms and pickup trucks are going to come to your house.
I think it's almost obvious the audience could probably guess what this guy thinks.
Yeah, I found this was one of the more. The topic of women was one of the more boring sections for me because he doesn't bring anything new to the table. It's the sort of view of women
they want to be submissive. Yeah.
Yeah.
They want to be maybe dominated, but they definitely want to have. Oh, he had some logic. That's right. He had a comment about democracy and about how women don't find these politician men and male leaders today, they find them so unattractive that they are.
I think it was that it comes back to the idea of the will. So women fundamentally look beyond themselves and are definitely attuned to the will, which is why in Bronze Age Pervert's view, they're more telepathic than men. That's one manifestation of their attunement to the will, but they look beyond themselves because they make the next generation, and as
they're body intelligent. They have greater body intelligence.
Yeah, exactly.
Struck it. Yeah, so they're more like it's that kind of idea, like typical sort of like idea of like, oh yeah, like women are more in touch with their bodies and stuff. But he calls it body intelligence, body intellect, and that our society, by demanding that they, do silly things like engage in the democratic process, they are being made to be more like head intellect, to rely more on their head intellect, and that makes them neurotic.
On one hand, they do try to drag down great men. I mean, they intuit when someone is ascending and try to hold them back. At the same time, they're attracted to these people who do ascend. And part of the reason why our society is growing more matriarchal is because women are fundamentally dissatisfied with how things are. Men have been feminized. Bronze Age Pervert says that women don't find shopkeepers and bankers attractive. They find warriors attractive, but our society really discourages those. So there's this immense sexual frustration and almost a frustration of the will, because women are, fundamentally want to look beyond themselves to the next generation, but are both being told not to by society. And then given a group of men, sort of the nerds, the new males, the soy boys, the beaters, things that they don't want to use to create the next generation. So there's an immense frustration.
Yeah, so I would agree that this is probably the least innovative part of his. Should we say, is that a good word? The least innovative part of his worldview is his idea. You probably could have you could read similar things, on like r/red pill or whatever. Really, so yeah, pretty stock standard view of women. I would say.
Yeah, I was quite bored by the sections on women, because there are some parts that are a bit different. Tying it back to the will. But on the whole,
I suppose, but he didn't unpack the telepathy very much.
Yeah, the telepathy. Yeah, but the telepathy thing was sort of a few lines about how women are in some way more in touch with the will, so they can connect with the wills of not only other people but other objects.
Yeah, and
more
animals.
readily. That was an interesting bit, but on the whole, the sections on women were pretty dull, because I've heard it before.
You've heard it, or you've thought it before, Jack?
I've thought it before. Yeah, that
too. All right. So we haven't spoken about his views on religion, have we?
Let's get to religion. Let's talk about religion. I think fundamentally, the problem with women in our society is that they're frustrated because they're being made into not real men, but, the fallen men that as exist today. And that frustration is given an outlet in democracy, so they can be stirred up by someone and elect bad leaders.
Yeah.
So religion. Animism is the natural religion, and he doesn't say why, but it is.
Yeah, he just references that he remembers as a child, like, having a connection to certain animals, certain, in particular, like, he can still feel the spirit of a particular dog following him. Mm-hmm. He doesn't believe in creationism. He doesn't even necessarily believe in, like, any particular religion, clearly. Yes, but he does believe in reincarnation. So I think this is a really interesting part, which was that he refutes kind of the classic reincarnation, such as you might see in Hinduism or certain forms of Buddhism, around like a soul or an essence kind of transcending the physical body, their sort of vessel, from life to life. And he sort of reduces or redefines, or perhaps in his view expands his view of reincarnation to be more around this idea of the will. And the will being, how would you describe it? Like this, so it's like, he says it's in your blood, and it's not to do with your DNA, but somehow it's like the drives, like your instincts and your preferences kind of are reinstantiated, at different points in time, in different bodies. So you have existed before, even if you can't remember it, but it's not in the sense of like a soul. It's more like the instant instantiation of these drives.
Yeah.
From the will.
Yeah, these particular drives, as an aside, I'm not sure how that's meaningfully different from an aspect of, from your personality in general. I mean, I would have considered your drives to be an aspect of the personality, but he makes that distinction without really describing why. One interesting outcome of his belief in reincarnation is that he brings up the question, if the human population is said to be so much greater now, where did all the souls come from?
Yes.
And
this is a really good part. This was one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, this was a part I really liked. This part. This was good stuff. Where he says, was it because maybe souls have been split? So one person in the past can now donate a soul to 3 vessels, or can we get souls from non-human animals? Ultimately, he comes to the conclusion that a lot of archaeology is probably fake. A lot of history is fake, which I wonder how much of history actually happened. That's wouldn't go as far as he does, but that's an interesting thought. And that the human population on Earth used to be billions. So there have been a succession of great civilizations who have risen and fallen sort of in a similar way to ours is falling at the moment through increasing comfort and decadence.
Yes, and then we are
those reincarnated. And then we there might be remnants of those great civilizations still in existence. So some of them, he holds open the possibility that at least one of those civilizations found a way to escape this cycle of increasing decadence and collapse and live, say at the center of the earth or something like that and observe us from a distance. He also says that some members of those fallen civilizations might still be alive and live, in caves and explain, folk tales of gnomes or elves or vampires, because they're these deformed, frightening creatures, these debased remnants of old decadent civilizations.
Yeah. And obviously, like the obvious refutation, or at least a question that comes up is, well, where did the original souls come from? Like this obviously leads to an infinite regress of reincarnation cycles, and he just doesn't address it. It's just like it seems as though it just didn't occur to him.
Yeah, that's a common theme.
Unless you're saying that it extends back an infinite amount of time, in which case, where did anything start? Or like, if it didn't extend back an infinite amount of time, then how come we can't just, like, the current people can't be the first instantiation of their souls? So yeah, again, he just never even sort of, he just sort of says that, oh yeah, there probably were billions of people before, and he just kind of says it, just leaves it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose he talks about, the souls are an expression of the will, and the will might be eternal. So it could be that it has just always.
Yeah, I could see coming at an angle like that.
But maybe that's reading too much into Bronze Age pervert theology. These philosophical discussions. I might be reading into the text too much.
Well, because he does say that, like, you have existed before, however, not in the way that your like head intellect perceives itself, like the kind of sort of first person subjective experience of oneself is like not the true self. Potentially is. I don't know if I'm struggling to think, am I accurate? Am I accurately representing this person's point of view? I think that's what he's saying. And whereas, like, the thing that is the will that is being reincarnated, like, that's the true you.
I think he also says that true self is completely homosexual, and then just leaves that hanging. I don't quite know what to make of that.
Yes. So I guess the last thing, unless you have anything else to say about reincarnation, I don't really know what else to say about the reincarnation thing, but I've got one other thing.
No, there's not too much more. I mean, there are some other aspects of religion that are worth covering, but I think we've probably gone over reincarnation. I mean,
what else about religion?
Well, so he's got a problem with monotheism and atheism. So he reckons that monotheism represents tiredness and domination from overpopulation. So say, we get tired, we get overpopulated, and the detritus of humanity demand a religion to reflect that, which is how we get monotheism. And he says that we're getting a new religion now in science. You've got this priestly caste of scientists telling everyone else how the world works, and that that's becoming the new religion. And I do think, to an extent, like he's hitting on something here that isn't totally absurd. I mean, to a lot of people, or at least people who've attended university, science is, I think, more of a religious system of belief than what I regard science as, which is really just an intellectual tool used to generate descriptive models that are sort of asymptotically close to reality. You have people saying, I believe the science, is a political statement, where they're talking about, a corpus of knowledge told to them by political actors, rather than talking about the scientific method. So I think when he talks about how science is becoming the new religion through atheism, he's not being totally absurd, like in some of his other statements.
Yeah, and that he clearly doesn't like Sam Harris and Sam Harris's contemporaries in the new atheists.
Yeah, because he talks about how his problem with the new atheists is that their atheism is the same as monotheism. So he says that both monotheism and atheism demand creation from nothing, which, I mean, I would have levelled the same accusation against him in his idea of the will. But, both those things require generation from nothing by a creator that lies outside of space and time. And matter is divine insofar as it can be used to uncover the characteristics of this creator. I'm not really sure what he means by that. I found that a bit obscure, or obscure even within the context of the Bronze Age mindset. I don't have much more to add about religion apart from what we've already discussed. It's in his view, Christianity or Islam or other monotheistic religions are just further tools by the spooks controlling the Leviathan to control the population and prevent great men rising.
So there was I don't have much to add on the religion stuff. It's pretty much summed up by atheism and and science being like kind of new religions. He doesn't buy into Christianity and stuff. He redefines his own ideas of like reincarnation. The thing that I would like to talk about is his view on cities.
Yeah, this is important. This is really important.
This is obviously okay. So remember, the guy likes space. And he likes being able to dominate space. And he doesn't really like the decadence of modern society or like the yeast people. And so in particular, what would be like people who just kind of live for mere, what he would say, like mere life, just trying to survive or whatever. So if you imagine a city like Manila or Mumbai, or Beijing, these are giant cities where there's people living on top of each other in tiny, cramped, high density living, not dominating the space around them in very dirty, or sometimes often very dirty environments. Mm-hmm. I think it's fair to say he really, really, really does not like these places or the people that inhabit them.
I think that's a pretty safe statement to make. He talks about the two broad modes of civilization. One he calls the default mode, which is the cities you see in, he talks about the cities in China or in the Philippines or in India of teeming humanity, overpopulated, and people who don't need space. And comparing that to, so he particularly likes the cities of, so the city-states in Italy.
Like ancient Greece,
Swiss,
like Athens.
Cities, ancient Greece. The German... German cities because
The cities
they have some space in them, and they exist to allow the elite sort of to cultivate their powers for war, to give them some leisure time in preparation for war. Some
and what you might say is like walled gardens. The walled gardens.
And an ability to live with with less gravity of need. And he says the downside of this is also where he's a bit inconsistent. He seems to imply that the downside is that you immiserate 99% of the population, which I would regard as a downside. But given the rest of what he talks about, you question why he would think it's a downside that a few nobles or a few rulers are able to have more leisure time and more time to cultivate their abilities while oppressing a large number of people, or why that's a problem.
It's not entirely clear. Like, so he talks about the Spartans, for example, how they used to use their cities as like a place for rest and recuperation. But in order, like they use that rest and recuperation in the city in order to prepare for war, right? Yeah. I don't know. He doesn't clearly link it to modern cities. Like, what modern city like acts like that?
Well, I don't think any modern city acts like that, which is his problem.
Yes. Yeah. True. Okay.
that we don't have modern cities that really exist that exist to allow leisure time for youths to prepare for war.
Yes. Yeah. So
modern cities exist for beta males and women, to be safe for those groups rather than to be places for aesthetic youths to develop themselves.
So I think that's like a nice combination of like many of his core principles around space and his distaste for modernity. Mm-hmm. Should we move on to how we got here?
Yeah. Once you'd read about his description of the world at the moment, controlled by spooks and the Leviathan, women having the vote, gay people being the commissars of the new regime. How much of a troll did you think?
When you put it like that.
Well, you say that. By this stage, I was more coming down on the side of this guy's serious.
Yeah, you see, the thing is, like the whole point of Poe's law, right? The original blog post is like, if he'd put a winky face on it, we would have been able to tell that he was joking. But he didn't put a fucking winky face anywhere in there.
Yeah.
And he doesn't seem like, I've not seen in any of his publications, any winky faces. And it's very difficult, I think, given his first principles and his analysis of the world the way it is, the gynocracy and the decadence of civilization, I am leaning more towards sincere, that this is not a troll.
I was by this point definitely leaning towards sincerity.
He also backs up like a lot of these points of views with like kind of tangential but loosely related first-hand accounts of his life experiences that I think they seem genuine. Like I can see, like, stumbling through like some city block drunk and getting into a fight with a bouncer or something, and like seeing wars and stuff. Like, it seems as though he's had these real life experiences and he's trying to contextualize these experiences within this worldview informed by people like Nietzsche.
Yeah, there were some of these experiences, though, that he described that I'm not sure if he actually experienced them or they're allegorical. Do you remember that anecdote he told when he was talking about how he experienced the real world once, where he was in a porn theatre and then an old man beside him started feeling him up. So he punched this guy. And then I think the bouncer tried to kick him out, but then the bouncer became a goblin and a vampire bat flew into the porn theatre. So he left, went outside, saw a black woman taking a shit in the middle of the road, and then looked in a car and the driver didn't have a head. So I mean, I'm not sure whether to take that allegorically or whether he really did he feels like he experienced that, and that is genuinely the real world.
Okay, so there's a couple of things on the topic of whether or not that's sincere. Okay, so there's the American Psycho perspective on that, which is that, you know, that's a piece of literature, and he's sort of like describing something like at the end of American Psycho, where it sort of becomes clear that the protagonist is having a sort of like descent into insanity, or it could be allegorical, like, okay, this is like he's speaking like metaphorically, the person turned into a problem. Or, you know, another interpretation could be like, no, he's being sincere, and when he's writing this, like, this is why I said that maybe the guy's got some sort of schizoaffective disorder or psychiatric disorder, or maybe he was on a psychedelic at the time and he just hasn't explicitly said that he takes psychedelics. But I don't think that he's being literary when I think it's unlikely that he's taking the American Psycho perspective. Personally, I don't.
Yeah.
I think it's probably more likely, for example, that maybe he's talking about having a trip.
The thing is, though, if he were taking psychedelic drugs, you expect he'd, or at least I feel like he'd probably mention it, because he has no problem talking about, you know, how he gets really drunk and wanders around during the day staring at people. Or he takes some sort of amino acid and walks around having taken that and thinks it gets him high.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure. But so my original point is just like, when it comes to the troll or not a troll question, like, yeah, I think he has enough of these like personal experiences where you get some glimpse into that this guy's life is or has been at times really quite chaotic, and potentially like that this is his magnum opus is also like him trying to make sense of like the chaos of the world and potentially his own life. And that's why I think how in depth it is, and then how in depth the worldview is tied to those conversations about his personal experiences makes me lean on sincere more.
By this point, definitely felt that he was more likely being sincere than a very high effort troll.
So our next section then, so we're both leaning a little bit more towards sincere, is how we got here, his historical analysis.
Yes. So, I mean, there were a few ways that we got to this point. How about we start with the corruption of men? And I reckon one of the most important ways that men became corrupted was through the undermining of male friendships. He regards male friendships or true
this is
friendship.
A key part. Yeah.
As he defines it, as vitally important.
So can you give us an example?
He says real male friendship in, say, the Bronze Age would be you are slighted. You know, someone insults you or humiliates you. So you gather up 50 friends and raid that person's house or wherever they live. And he asks,
like blood feud sort of stuff.
Who would do that for you today? And that's I'd raid someone's house for you, Levi.
Yeah. Well, I'd expect nothing less.
Would you be able to find 50 people like me?
Maybe Ed.
Who'd be willing to decapitate someone with a claymore if they insulted you?
Oh yeah. Point taken. I reckon 99% of the men that I know are a bunch of betas who wouldn't cleave off my enemy's head for me. But no, you would for me, Jack.
Because I'm a Sigma male.
He uses like a number of examples, and the examples that he pulls on tend to be from ancient Greece. Essentially, these Greek heroes that tend to come in duos, male duos.
Mm-hmm. Like Achilles and Patroclus he uses as an example.
Yeah, right. Are they the blokes who raided Troy, was it? Was that the Peloponnesian War?
Yeah, they were involved in the Trojan War. Patroclus was killed, so Achilles lost his shit, killed a bunch of people, dragged Hector's corpse behind his chariot, doing doughies outside the walls of Troy.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was eventually
fucking
himself-killed.
Skull dragged Hector. So like,
the Bronze Age equivalent
these
of
weren't
ripping donuts in a Honda Civic in the Westfield parking lot.
out at knife point.
Shadow.
Yeah. No, but I think a key point is that these were not platonic, but they also weren't like sexualized. They weren't sexual friendships, and they were more like brothers, I suppose, like brothers in arms.
Yeah.
Essentially brotherhood, and that you can't really find. And so part of, from a historical point of view, okay, it used to be that strong men could exist and that strong male friendships could exist. But how did we lose that? How did we get here to this point where men are isolated and feminized?
True male friendships allow both men involved to really develop what is in the blood, in his words, develop that will that reincarnates those abilities. So there are a few ways. So male-only spaces have been undermined. So he talks about how fraternities are banned, how the Scouts are forced to accept women now. But an important part is also, as you the sexualization of close male relationships. So
yes,
men now don't. They recoil from these sort of relationships because they think that those relationships are gay. If you get too close to a man, you're gay. As the sort of male who would otherwise become a great man, you love having sex with women and not other men. So that's not going to work.
You know what the interesting thing is though? He never deals with the issue of how in Greek society men would have sexual relationships with boys. But I guess
Maybe that's an aspect of history that's been fabricated by matriarchal.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, no. That's a good point. I could see the gynocracy that's fabricating that sort of lie in order to discredit ancient Greek society potentially.
It's what they want you to believe, man.
Yeah, man. So what other parts of how we got here? So we've covered strong male friendships.
Another way that men are kept from realizing their true potential is that there's constant titillation and sort of empty vice given to us. So the image of the masturbating chimp rears its head once again. This is a really important.
We should just have like a gif of a masturbating
gif of a masturbating chimp.
we should get that. We should get that picture of that jacked up chimp. The super jacked chimp. Just put that as the clip.
Beating his pork sword like a maniac. Yeah. So that we're bombarded constantly by empty stimulation or empty vice like pornography, intensely sexualized media. Like if you've seen a rap video clip in the past 10 years, you know exactly what I mean.
It's pretty much a porno.
It's as close to porn as you can get without not being allowed on TV. Yeah. So I think that's another way that men are kept from becoming more perfect. Another way is that exercise is more and more discouraged. So he seems to think that an aesthetic physique is certainly not sufficient, but it is necessary to self-overcoming and becoming a great man.
Yeah, and he does reference like the academy in ancient Greece as being, and obviously the academy under Aristotle raised Alexander the Great, and obviously Bap is a huge fan of Alexander the Great. So like the academy, mate, famously, it was required that they train their body as well as their mind. So this is clearly something that's incredibly, and then you also like just have to look at his old Twitter posts. Like he's just always posting pictures of like glistening men flexing their biceps. So
yeah, well, especially Pietro Baselli is he just this guy he simped over.
The engineer, the Italian engineer, right? Just
the Italian engineer. I mean, look,
he's also a bodybuilder.
The guy's jacked as anything.
I mean, it's good. I mean, good on him. Like being an engineer and jacked is pretty great.
Yeah, so clearly discouraging physical perfection is another way that men are kept weak. And, this is, he talks about men watching sport on TV rather than playing sport. Talks about men drinking, I think it was like vegetable oil smoothies. And
have you seen those conversations about soy?
The
stuff around, like,
phytoestrogens in soil.
the phytoestrogens,
making you into a
feminizing,
beta new male cuck.
giving you moobs.
Moobs, yeah. Moobs,
I mean,
getting you
it's kind of derivative. It's not that original. It's very red pill, I reckon.
Yeah, that part. Yeah, that was very r/red pill. That aspect is less fun than the kobolds living under a mountain are the remnants of a long forgotten civilization. I enjoyed that much more.
We did touch on it a little bit, but I suppose we can look at it from a more historical perspective. Is like with regards to women, acquiring more political power. Like, he obviously does not have a good view of, like, I think like the feminist movement and the way that women, I guess, I suppose through the suffragette movement, like, basically acquired political power. And I don't know if he fully explains it. Maybe it's just because it's been a little while since I read the book, but it seems to be some sort of interplay with democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And how that like, maybe it's the shadow masters, the master of slaves, who have used the mechanisms of democracy to basically enable women in order to, like, be able to seize more political power historically. Am I reading into it correctly?
I don't think that's unfair. If it is unfair and you're listening, Bronze Age pervert, just let us know.
Please let us know in the comments below. Could you imagine if we got to talk to this guy?
Fuck yeah.
Dude, I would legitimately, like, actually be keen to talk to him.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's fascinating. I suppose one thing that we haven't talked in, that maybe it relates to how we got here, is regards to, like, the different races.
Yeah, let's get into
Let's talk about race.
Women. Let's talk about race.
We're talking about the gays and the lesbians and the women. We haven't talked about the race. What peoples does he like, Jack? And maybe we don't have to say why he likes them yet, but who does he like?
Well, I was disappointed because it's a bit boring that he says he likes white people the most. Because, that's old hat. Like, I've heard that before.
Come on, man.
I want to hear supremacists from other races.
Yeah,
white people have the greatest need for space,
but
which
you know
means
what?
No,
Jack. Okay, like, I got to stick up for Bronze Age because he, yes, he does. Put white people, Anglo-European, I assume. Well, not assume. He does specifically talk about Anglos. At the apex, at the zenith of the racial ziggurat, and but he does have a place in his heart for some other races, and some other cultural groups.
That's true.
He's not an out and out, just like straight up black and white, so to speak, racial supremacist.
He doesn't mind the Japanese.
I think he quite likes the Japanese, actually. So, yeah, okay. So he likes the Japanese. He clearly likes white people, Western Europeans.
He prefers Africans to Chinese people.
Yes. Now
they have a greater need for space.
China. Whoa, we're getting into explanations here. Really good. It's just like construct the hierarchy first, mate. Okay, so obviously,
according to true science, let's find a hierarchy of biology.
We need to take an ontological approach to this to the issue of race. So clearly, whites are at the top. And I must say, it's a real privilege to be able to share electrons with you right now, Jack.
as the one of the two of us with the greatest need for space.
So then people like, so we must make a distinction between different types of Asian people. So we can say at least 5 Asian people that I can think of at the top of my head that he refers to directly in the book, but he doesn't lump all Asian people in together, right? So he explicitly mentions Filipinos. He explicitly mentions Indians or like South Asians. He explicitly mentions Japanese people. He explicitly mentions Chinese, in particular the Han Chinese, and he explicitly mentions the Mongolians.
Yeah, that's
he
true.
doesn't
That's
he
true.
doesn't regard them all the same. In fact, there's clearly a hierarchy within the sort of Asian group of peoples.
Indians and Filipinos are ugly. He makes
Yes.
that much clear. He
He's so easily Jack. You know this is going to be cut up. Like this is going to be clipped down one day, and you're just this is going to be plastered all over like Vice. Jack. No, sorry, I won't say your name. Edit that out. Jack says Asians and Filipinos are ugly.
Yeah. So he attributes the fact that the Filipinos and Indian people are ugly to that they marry for financial reasons. So they're not producing young on the basis of, you take a superior woman and a superior man and they produce superior offspring. It's for financial reasons, which is why
instead of like
they're ugly
kind of utilitarian
and they don't and why they don't win many medals at the Olympics.
Yeah, here's the exact explanation of why India, despite having such a large population, just does not perform. And you know what? Like, actually, just as an aside, it is a curiosity as to why India doesn't win more medals. I don't know if I would agree with his causal explanation.
Anyway,
Okay.
he does though soften his stance on the Philippines by saying that was it like they have a good sense of humor or something?
Yeah, I assume he probably likes Duterte.
That wouldn't surprise me. Although that's a bigger leap than I, as a respected anthropologist, would probably be willing to make.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's very intellectually dishonest of me. I
need to
apologize.
bear in mind my academic credibility.
It took me 7 years to get this PhD in internet anthropology. So now there's the really interesting one. Okay, so let's talk about the Han Chinese for a second.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we've already mentioned that they're really bad.
Yeah, like really bad, right?
He really does not like them. They eat
Really
with their
doesn't like
mouths open. High population.
Take up a lot of space. Don't respect personal space.
He just doesn't like them.
Like, look at Beijing. Look at the size of it. Look at how much air pollution it has, man. Like,
yeah,
like on a legitimate level, like, oh man,
at the
they crush
Olympics
it.
though. Unlike,
Crush it.
have you seen the Chinese weightlifting team? If you're talking about aesthetic physiques,
dude, have you seen the Chinese like circus ballet?
Are they also jacked?
Oh, dude, it's legitimately, it's like one of the most incredible things you'll ever see. It's like this mixture of like acrobatics and circus performance, but also ballet. So they'll do like Swan Lake, but they'll have like this jacked Chinese dude, like Han Chinese guy, like probably 6'4", like shredded, like he looks like a triangle on legs, right? And he'll have like, he'll basically be like basketball spinning like a ballerina, a small Chinese lady on his fingers, like spinning her like a basketball, pretty much. It's crazy. And he's shredded. So yeah, obviously the Chinese
maybe
are
20
above the Indian in the racial hierarchy, in BAP's racial hierarchy.
Yeah, look, I think BAP is being unfair to the Chinese when it comes to getting jacked. There are clear examples of jacked Han Chinese, which I think BAP is being unfair to and not acknowledging. And there are some very aesthetic people there.
I think I would also say that BAP should enhance his cross-cultural readings, because I would think that somebody like Sun Tzu would be, right up BAP's alley of reading.
Yeah, you'd think so.
You'd think so, right? But he doesn't like the bureaucracies of the Chinese. He doesn't like the giant cities of the Chinese.
Bronze Age Pervert is very partial to people who are good at violence. And Sun Tzu, by all accounts, was good at violence.
And the Chinese have a long and rich history of extreme violence.
They are, historically, they're really good.
Really, really good. So
violence.
Now, Japanese.
He likes them.
He likes it. And why does he like them?
Look, I'm not actually sure why he likes them.
No, I don't know why he likes them.
the things he talks about I think he likes them because he's a weed, but like, you know, I say that keeping my academic integrity intact, that's not a leap. That's a reasonable assertion. He talks about, I mean, look, that's also a high population density area. I mean, what Tokyo is,
so this is
million people in it or something like that.
Unless you posit the idea that the Japanese are using Tokyo and Shanghai as was kind of like to prepare for war, but you know, it doesn't seem like they're preparing for war. And he never mentioned Seoul.
And you know,
mentions the Koreans.
No, he doesn't really go into why he likes the Japanese, but
no, he likes the Japanese.
I assume it has a lot. I think it has a lot to do with hentai, but he never goes into that.
No, he does explicitly say that like the Japanese culture likes beauty. Okay. Do you remember that bit?
So
he does talk about that they're graceful, polite, and clean, and they have a respect for beauty. You know, like the geishas. And hentai.
Yeah, all right. Maybe I was being unfair to them.
The most interesting of the Asian subraces, I think, is the Mongolians.
Yeah, definitely.
Because this is where he really bucks the trend, and I think he probably really likes Mongolians. There's a lot of space in Mongolia.
He appreciates their love of space.
The steppes. In a number of points in the book, he talks about how good the steppes are.
Yeah, he's a big fan.
They're very warlike, I think. You know, they have a strong history of like, you know, like conquering the world, you know, like Genghis. Like Genghis is essentially like Alexander the Great of Mongolia.
Pretty much. So it's as expected, he took the boring route of thinking of, you know, saying that white people are the best. But to his credit, he is more ecumenical racial essentialist than you would expect.
Yeah, and the interesting thing as well, you know, as a person who's not of any of those races, what's interesting is that he views like mixed race people as like he only has like one sentence or something in the book where he just sort of mentions that, like, you know, if it weren't for like essentially colonization or like I guess like history, like mixed race people wouldn't exist or something like that. And yeah, I think he does have this clear sort of ontological approach to race, and that those boundaries should be respected, I suppose, or not necessarily, I suppose, enforced by implication, or that would be the natural thing that would happen, is that if we had this natural separation of races, that we wouldn't have mixed race people.
He definitely seems to regard mixed race people as less good, because he talks about how different races have different needs for space, and if you mix them, then, you know, the mixed race person is going to be confused about how much space they want.
Oh yes. So, but in that regard, like in defense of Bronze Age, right? You know, he's really coming from like a position of, you know, he's really thinking about the poor mixed race person who doesn't know how much space they need. You know, it's for their own benefit.
Well, it's very un-Bronze Age for him to be concerned about the welfare of others. So
yes.
Another inconsistency.
Other inconsistency. So I think we've talked about race quite a bit. Is there anything else about race other than
I'm sure
it essentially comes down to, okay, who's filthy and lives in cities that are too big and gross?
Yeah, that's basically it.
And then you've got to weight that by how aesthetic they are.
It all comes back to the need for space and aesthetics.
It actually does,
you know, the German for him it seems to be like the Periclean Greece, or around Periclean Athens around that time, or the Germanic tribesmen, like, you know, the Visigoths and things like that, who were free, uncivilized, you know, aesthetic as fuck, everything you could want in a group of men. They're the apex. Then you've got the Mongolians. They're good. You've got
we like
the
them.
Japanese. They're good.
Well, they had the samurai as well, you know.
Yeah, they're cool.
Yeah, samurai cool.
Yeah. Then you've got I'm not sure. Yeah, Africa's a bit of a wild card because he just brings it up, I think, a handful of times, just saying they have a greater need for space than Chinese people.
I don't think he likes Africans.
We can, I'm going to go ahead and assume he doesn't like them much.
He never mentions Arabs, but of course,
he mentions the Bedouin,
right? Yes,
reasonably, approvingly, because they were nomadic, and being a nomad's cool because it's not agricultural.
It's not, and you do require a lot of space if you're a nomad.
Yeah, so before they settled down, I think he regards at least the Bedouin before they became cut.
There's one important
and got into living in one place. Yeah, before that they were good.
Fucking,
I completely can't believe I forgot about his view of Arabs. Shame on
stationary fucking beta race settling in a single location.
Exactly.
So no, okay. What is the most important ethnic group that we have missed out, Jack?
I don't know. I've brought up the Germans and the Greeks.
The ethnic group. The ethnic group that, of course, it's the nerdish ones.
Oh man, how could I forget the Jews? Yeah,
mate.
He doesn't like it.
Whoa, you gave away the punchline, man.
Yeah, okay.
Guess.
Spoiler warning.
Spoiler
He doesn't like the Jews.
Spoiler alert, he doesn't like them.
Yeah, so
who would have thunk it? Could you? No. Imagine what a plot twist that would have been if actually he came out and he was like, you know what? The Jews, they're pretty bloody good.
The best.
The best.
Chef's kiss. Mwah.
He just had to toe the typical white supremacist line and throw the Jews under the bus. How uninventive.
This is a boring bit. Bit because, like, with the Mongolians, that was a plot twist. This is just, just saying, to his credit, he says the Jews used to be cool when they were more warlike, but
I think he would have liked them, when it was like good old days, the Canaanites, hitting heads with the Israelites and, conquering people and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Tribal
It does make me wonder what he'd think of, say, Israel at the moment, where they're certainly not above shooting a rocket at someone.
But, that's an interesting point because surely he likes
to know what
he likes Benji, right? No, he wouldn't like.
Yeah, Bibi, you'd think is his kind of guy, but
he's a fucking alpha. You want to talk about a guy who will fuck you up, man? Like Benji will come to your house and rip your head off, mate. Shoot a torpedo through your window,
Benjamin Netanyahu is. Yeah, he's really good at violence. He's
really good at violence.
He knows how to be violent. So
he knows how to be very violent. He knows. So
that's a big question mark. What he'd think of Israel now.
It's funny that he just talks a lot of shit about Jewish people, but he doesn't actually talk about Israel. It's interesting.
Yeah, well, especially the main problem with the Jews is,
well, he doesn't really talk about space.
Make me unemployable. Is for him the main problem is that they've led to the nerd, an archetypal character in our society.
Look how many Nobel Prizes they've won, Jack. Really? You fucking kidding me?
Yeah, exactly. But his idea of the nerd, which is, I think, the main way that Jews have tripped up, say, good, proud German barbarians, is through the nerd. So Jews love they like numerical knowledge and they like language and hate art, say representations of beauty. And through that, they've created the nerd, who is someone of middling intelligence, often, a midwit.
And often thinks they're smarter than they are.
Definitely
like you and I, obviously.
Reminiscent of his criticism of Darwin, they like to collect petty facts and then regurgitate them. And
this is true. I mean, that was kind of our undergraduate
They know a lot. Yeah, that. Well, I mean,
It's kind of our
definitely was me in undergrad, and probably is me now. And these nerds tend to be beta males. Like they're the ones who are constantly trying to impress women and debase themselves for women. They tend to become new males. Yeah, I'm assuming they develop a passion for soy products.
Yeah. So
all of the worst things in men
what was surprising
can be traced or largely traced to nerds, which are the creation of Jewish.
So the interesting thing is he doesn't go full on like full blown Jewish conspiracy, you know. It's more of a kind of
to his credit, he doesn't.
It's more like a miasmic sort of. Just they kind of have influenced the culture such that we have nerdishness, not explicit. Oh, the Jews run the world. Sort of thing.
You're right.
Yeah. So I suppose it's kind of like a soft anti-Semitism.
Yeah, you're right. There were a few plot twists. It wasn't your straight ahead like George Soros created coronavirus himself and unleashed on the world. It's a bit more. It's a bit different.
So clearly,
it's mostly they're responsible for the nerd.
Bronze Age has a very nuanced view of race.
There's more to it than I would have guessed at the start.
Yeah. Another interesting point is that he does like it, and this intersects with his views on like nationalism, and like how he's not necessarily saying that like okay, and like Anglo white should go out there and rule the world, like he's not advocating like the final solution, like or whatever, because like for example, he's sympathetic towards the native Fijians against in their coup against the Hindus, the Indian Fijians. The Indian Fijians, because like how many years ago, like 10, 15 years ago, with the coup.
And Frank.
He seems to be sympathetic towards their fight to get, quote unquote, get back their country or whatever. And he clearly doesn't like Indians. So, and if you've ever seen a Fijian dude, like they're pretty fucking shredded. Like native Fijian dudes, like they're pretty.
I feel like there's a common theme to a lot of this.
Like clearly, like you've seen the Sevens. Have you ever seen Sevens rugby?
No.
Oh, dude, watch Sevens rugby, man. These Fijian dudes, they shred everybody to pieces.
No, I'm gonna.
They're like
right
crazy.
Now.
They're so crazy, and they're like
Fijian rugby players.
So it's Fijian rugby players Sevens. Like the number seven. Yeah. They're like legitimately like crazy. So he, I don't know how many Indian Fijians are on that team, but I don't think there's that many. I think it's mostly a native team. So yeah, like he likes ethno-nationalism, but it's not inherently white ethno-nationalism, because he seems to be supportive of Fijian native ethno-nationalism.
Yeah, an additional wrinkle to his ethno-nationalism is he seems to really like city-states. He seems to quite like the idea of ethno-city-states.
Yeah, I'd say if we could sum it up, basically I think it would look, his ideal world would look something along the lines of ethno-city-states with strong men and submissive women, where the city-states are nice and clean and there's a committal to beauty, and the function of the city is to be a walled garden where the men of the city can rest and prepare for war, between wars.
Yeah, and it's ruled by a military, but not a military dictatorship. His view of how it should be ruled,
a military class.
You have bands of male friends who will fight for each other, who in times of need will all come together and
will occasionally castrate men in the neighbouring city.
Yeah, exactly. They'll occasionally
and there's no nerds.
No nerds. Or if there are nerds, then they're in their right.
Eunuchs.
Eunuchs, yeah.
I think he, in a weird way, I think he would actually agree with what we just said. Maybe not in so many words, but I don't feel as though we misrepresented him just then.
Oh, look, I'm not trying to misrepresent this guy. I'm trying to give my best faith interpretation.
I think that is the world according to the Bronze Age pervert. No?
I think I've been quite faithful to the text.
Okay, well, I think we've covered everything except for the future.
He's optimistic about the future. He reckons our lifetimes we're going to see a re-emergence. So he reckons Donald Trump is just the beginning. Like, Donald Trump is not the Bronze Age man for him. So say Donald Trump's not a warrior.
I think that's
he relies on other people for security.
Because I was kind of expecting this to be like, at some point he would basically just like sing the praises of Trump, but he didn't.
Yeah. Trump is not perfect. He likes him, but he's just the beginning. He reckons we're going to see, Caesars and Genghis Khans re-emerge within our lifetimes, and the Leviathan will crumble.
And potentially coming from the insides of the military, strong men from the military taking over, kind of like a Fiji situation potentially, but all over the world.
He reckons these people are going to band together, leave our yeast societies, go to the tropics and form their own governments and go back to piracy, because he really likes pirates.
Yeah, so he calls the coming roughly, if I remember correctly, the coming age of piracy, or the new golden age of piracy,
specifically from the tropics.
Yeah, look, I guess you can glisten in sweat in the tropics. It's a good place to be.
You don't need baby oil. Yeah,
no. Yeah, you can walk around shirt off all the time,
year round. Look, it's
there's
really
lots of islands to dominate.
So long as you have enough chalk to grip a barbell, you don't have sweaty palms to drop that 300 kilo deadlift, it's a good spot.
Yeah, I can see where he's coming from with that.
And then that brings us probably to the last part, the last main part that we should discuss, which is his view on what people can do now to start bringing about this. And this was one of my favourite sections, not because
this was practical guides for people who want to bring about the new age.
Yeah.
So if you want to sign up.
It didn't say anything. Yeah, nothing that I didn't already know, except it was much more coherent. Like this part was very readable.
Yeah, the book became
I'll give him
coherent towards the end. It was part 2. Yeah, it was just complete insanity.
Oh, Parable of Iron Prison.
Oh God. Anyways, we'll keep on going with.
Yeah, basically, he talks about how if you want to get into politics and you believe in the coming Bronze Age or atavism of the Bronze Age, then you need to hide in his words, hide your power level. You've got to, at least exteriorly, adopt more mainstream views until the time comes when you can reveal your power level. Then you can also fight with the power of memes and with video. So he regards video
he's kind
as the way to communicate with the masses. And I don't disagree. I think video probably is the dominant.
He does have an interesting idea. It's almost like he's proposing some sort of like distributed, like decentralized sort of propaganda machine.
Yeah.
Where nobody's directly. He's kind of like, he's almost like, like that quote from the Dark Knight. It was like, some men just want to see the world burn, except he doesn't want to see the world burn necessarily in the same way, but he's just kind of like sowing ideas. He's just putting it out there like, hey, memes are good.
Yeah, it's decentralized. And he uses the example of the 2016 Trump campaign where people, Trump supporters came
greatest
together
campaign.
And used memes to, And look, to be fair, some of those memes were really good. I mean,
election.
The Clinton campaign got blown away when it came to the meme battleground. They just didn't have what it.
Yeah, they got cocked, man.
They got completely cocked.
Dude, seriously? Dude, you got to give Trump some credit, dude. The 2016 election was fucking hectic. He crushed it.
It was entertaining as anything.
So,
Like, I mean-
this is a 20. So he's right. So Bronze Age is writing this halfway through the first Trump presidency, the first of many.
Yeah.
And
The first of many.
so 2018. But okay. So Back to the Future.
Yeah.
So we're sowing meme propaganda, distributed meme engine.
Yeah. So that's the distributed arm. Then he actually has an organized arm. So he talks about the need to form movements, and he says that these should be social movements first and foremost with an implicit.
This is a really interesting part.
Goal. I enjoyed this part. So they have to be social movements with an implicit political goal. They can't be political, like explicitly political movements.
But it's almost wholesome what he proposes.
What he proposes, yeah, I like the sound of a lot of what he proposes.
Like if they weren't ethno-nationalists at the same time, like
maybe. apart from the ethno-nationalism and misogyny, it's not bad. So what he proposes. So what are the things missing in our society? So male friendship, aesthetics, physical fitness. And a sense of belonging, and a sense of the sublimity of nature.
Yeah, so he proposes. He basically proposes the Boy Scouts. Like essentially.
Yes, he proposes the Boy Scouts.
He proposes ethno-nationalist Boy Scouts. Which, let's be honest, it's kind of getting back to the Boy Scouts' roots, really.
Yeah, I mean, the ethno-nationalist part might be a bit redundant, depending on how far back you go with the Boy Scouts. So he says, okay, so you're getting boys together, and you teach them that it's okay to have close male friendships and that it's not gay. You get them out in nature, so they're moving around.
There's lots of undominated space.
Yeah, undominated space. You're not going to get aesthetic. You're not going to get shredded by walking around in nature, but it builds a foundation.
Yeah, no masturbating.
Strict no masturbation policy. You inculcate the correct values when you're out in the wilderness with them.
Of racial
No women is really important because women,
we must have hard gender segregation.
So women provoke in men, sexually competitive desires, and women seek these out to make men compete for them. Like they're succubi, and you don't want that
clearly.
In your ethno-nationalist Boy Scouts. Clearly, I mean that's self-evident, right? So
do we even really need to say
women
at this point, given the man's worldview?
I just want to make sure there's no confusion that you can't have women.
There is absolutely no
in the Bronze Age Boy Scouts.
In our ethno-nationalist Bronze Age Boy Scouts.
You have these movements. He says it's really important not to have any violence and to publicly disavow it, and says that you will get agent provocateurs in there.
One of the parts where he's inconsistent, because it's like we're going into the age of piracy, right? Where we get to have Blackbeards and Cortezes and fucking, Periclitus and shit again. But in order to get there, we've got to go like non-violent route, right? We just got to organise, get together, go on camping trips and shit.
He's just being pragmatic.
Yeah,
we live in a cucked world at the moment. We live in the trash world, and the way that you bring about, the Sigma male paradise is you've got to be non-violent for a bit.
Ruled by Pietro.
You've got to suck it up. Sorry.
Yeah, you could. This is an issue of delayed gratification. You've got to delay your bloodlust.
Exactly.
Until we can establish military autocracy, autocratic military nation states, and but in between here and there, got to sell some fucking brownies. Got to go out. And
no doubt. Look, it's the masturbating chimp. You've got to put off gratification. You can't just masturbate in your cage whenever.
That's why you must have chalk on your hands at all time in case, one, you need to deadlift something, and two,
Yeah.
to prevent you from succumbing to the temptation to masturbate. Just have chalk on your hands.
I couldn't put it better myself. So
Plus it makes you wider.
yeah, that too. What else? Oh, you've got a tan actually. He says that he just says kind of out of nowhere that you have to tan for 30 minutes a day because we're meant to worship the sun.
No, because he cares about, there's the sun, but also the sun is alpha as fuck. Secondly,
it's a giant nuclear fusion reaction. Like that is pretty alpha. Just a big
like if I were
explosion in space.
It's a billion-year-old explosion. How the fuck you get any more alpha than that? But also, like so that's in a diatribe he has about like looking after yourself and like it's related to health, and he clearly values health and like vitamin D and like eating healthy and exercising and stuff. Which if you took away all the sort of misogyny and homophobia and anti-Semitism and ethno-nationalism, some of his values are like fairly like agreeable.
Apart from all the disagreeable values, he has some agreeable ones.
Like telling young men to go and get a tan, spend some time in the sun, make sure you eat healthy and work out is like pretty great, really.
Yeah, look,
I think we need more
Scout,
role males like this.
The Boy Scout idea, except for some of the less savoury aspects, isn't too bad. Yeah, I think a lot of young men are very, very lonely. Something like that to get them moving, to get them friends, isn't bad. It's just.
But it's purely a means towards the age of piracy,
which is itself a noble pursuit.
So, is there anything else about the future? Like, let's just be clear. Like, the age of piracy is a good thing. We want the age of piracy.
Unambiguously. I cannot wait to captain a ship somewhere on the equator, rob people blind, castrate islands worth of boys, get shredded, get tanned.
Impose my will on space.
Spread through space.
And not masturbate.
And crush nerds without masturbating.
So what else about the future is that's interesting?
I don't know. It is interesting that he views the coming age really as the few most worthy members of our society just leaving rather than trying to remake existing societies. I do think that's slightly different because he's
almost like a secessionist, really.
Yeah, because if you look at other, ethno-nationalist books, like say the Turner Diaries, that's very much like you ethnically cleanse an existing society, whereas this guy's saying the best will just move somewhere else.
Yeah.
So he sets himself apart from some other racial extremists in that way. So, ratings. What we want to do is we rate books based on two metrics. One, we evaluate how convincing it is. Out of 10, how convinced are you? 0, totally unconvinced. 10, you are a convert. You are joining the ethno-nationalist Boy Scouts. The next metric is what's the chance that this is a troll, from 0% to 100%. So, Levi, on these two measures, what are your thoughts on Bronze Age mindset?
The first one, which is how convinced am I? Like, how ready am I to pick up, I suppose, a scabbard and to start just like slice and dice at my enemies?
Start buccaneering.
I see. Here's my. Maybe this is because I'm, not an Anglo-Saxon, and I don't necessarily think, as a mixed race person, I don't necessarily feel as though like the world that Bronze Age is bringing about is necessarily a world in which I would find a place. I don't know if I would feel a like very strong sense of belonging in this world. So I feel like somewhat of a sideline supporter, really. But having said that, like I would say that's probably like a strong 8.5. So I'm kind of like in this position where like I like the idea, I'm down with it, but just being realistic, like I'm probably going to be one of the ones that'll have my balls cut off, because I made the mistake of being mixed race. So, but I'd say like go have at it, fellas. Go get that fucking Bronze Age. What about you, Jack?
Well, as a proud Anglo-Saxon, I'm all for this world. No, and
Jack never has a job ever again.
Please don't employ me. No, it's with this book. I found there were a handful of sections that a small number that I agreed with. This thing about the political marionettes offering us only two choices, trying to convince us that there are only two political positions,
and the stuff about Jews, right? You're saying the stuff that
and the stuff about that too, naturally,
yeah.
And then, this is sort of something that's not a big surprise to anyone, but yes, that there are problems of money and problems of personal interests in science that can corrupt results. And then I found some of his ideas
very generous interpretation.
Yes. No, I'm talking about the things I like. It's the shit sandwich model. You offer something you like, something you don't like, something you like, and then your final thoughts. This is how you deliver criticism, Levi.
Constructive. Okay. Sorry. Keep on going.
Constructive. I'm sure Age Pervert is taking notes and will listen to what I've said for his sequel. But and then the final section where he's talking about the Boy Scouts it's interesting because that seems more practical. Maybe because the rest of the book is quite incoherent. Like even just the fact that was more coherent made me more amenable to it. But
he finishes strong.
There were a few things in there that were good. Then in terms of how entertaining it was, there were a few spins on, your standard ethno-nationalism, your standard misogyny, the fact that there are mole people living underground who are the remnants of a despicable and fallen former civilization. There were some fun parts of it that I didn't expect and that surprised me and were enjoyable. But for the most part, it's fairly tried and true tropes that you find, you've heard elsewhere, written in a way that is often annoying when he's trying to ape Nietzsche, but is sometimes quite fun when he's writing. You get the feeling that he's writing more as himself, how he would write if he weren't just trying to be 2018 Nietzsche. Based on those things, how convincing is it? I'd give it a 4 out of 10.
You're giving it a real rating.
Yeah, look, a real rating.
Okay, okay. No, keep on going. I'll reassess my
8.5. mostly forgettable. But with enough fun bits to make it that I don't totally regret my time with it. Like, so say he came out with Bronze Age 2, I would be tempted to read it if it weren't too long. If it were under 150 pages, I would consider reading it.
So maybe I wouldn't give it an 8.5. If I'm being totally serious.
If you were being less ironic about looking forward to the coming ethno-state that you probably wouldn't be a part of, what would you rate it?
Ethno-city-states. I like his values of like health and getting shredded. Largely agree with him about the mole people.
Yeah, look, I think there's merit to it.
I think our souls sing in sync when it comes to the anti-establishment sort of vibes. I do agree that with him, at least on that level. Probably don't agree with him on the race stuff. Definitely agree with him on the power of memes. Not vibing the race stuff so much. So I've probably got to give him like a 3.
Ooh, I'm the sympathetic one now.
But I could easily bump that to like a 5 or 6 if I got to get in on this fucking ethno state.
Yeah. So look, if you were white as me, it would be a 9.5.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, look, I'm really just butthurt because I can't get in on the fucking Boy Scouts.
now that we've given our academically sound scores based on how convinced we are,
We've
how
submitted
likely
this to a peer review of our.
I've already
our
submitted
peers.
this to peer review.
Yeah, it's going to be Nature.
Oh yeah, look, I mean, Oxford University Press and Yale are already coming to blows, physical blows, over who can publish a transcript of this podcast. So
Fucking nerds.
it's a bunch of nerds.
So, what was the second question?
How likely is this to be a troll?
Okay, you go first.
I read the blurb and thought this guy is probably a troll. I looked at this guy's posts on social media, thought this guy's probably a troll. While reading it, I swung back and forth quite a lot from thinking that this guy is completely sincere to this is an incredibly high effort troll, but definitely a troll. At the moment, I reckon I would say I'm 70% sure that he's being sincere. I think this is too much effort to be a throwaway troll, definitely, and probably too much effort to be even a high effort troll. And this guy is making money off it. So
Yeah, off his persona.
yeah, 70% chance this guy is being serious.
Yeah. I reckon that it's probably, I would put it at like 90% or something like that. I reckon he's dead serious. And the reason why I think that, the primary evidence to my perspective, is the ongoing nature of his online persona.
Yeah,
the sustained, like, it would be one thing if this guy just wrote this book, or if this guy just had the Twitter and he wrote the book. You could argue, yeah, like the Twitter account's taking the piss and this book's just him taking the piss. But like, he has continued on in relative obscurity. Like, look, we don't have 15,000 followers. We have got 0 followers. So like, who do we say what's obscure and what's not? But like, in all seriousness, like, he has a Telegram group of 15,000 people. Now that seems like a lot to us, but it's actually fuck all on the internet. He is a very obscure person, and he has continued his persona in his obscurity, and he's making money off it. And I think in particular, when you listen to him, I think he sounds really sincere on his podcast. But I just can't figure out which parts within his persona are just weird, zany, like the title of his podcast. And, how you separate that from, and this is why I think that Bronze Age mindset really was actually like just a wonderful piece of source material for our first episode. Because even then, I can't give it 100%, because there are just these moments of just like utter ridiculousness in the book, and parts of his online persona. They're just like, come on, man, there's no way you're real.
Well, that's the beauty of almost 8 billion people on Earth plus the internet, is you turn up some interesting people. Which is
we
why
really are living in
the
greatest age of humanity.
I think we are. And this is why people like us, esteemed academics, are necessary.
Esteemed,
this is
the highest honours. You know what I like?
Blood, we are expressions of the universal will.
We are here to really subject this to a high level of scrutiny. So I just to leave us on a really positive note, I like the idea. I like to imagine when I'm going to bed at night, as I drift off to sleep, I envisage Mr. Bronze Age kind of sauntering off down some, Mediterranean beach, traps looking juicy.
Naturally.
And he's just got this fucking bizarre narrative in his head about where the world is going. And he like legitimately thinks like, oh yeah, we're heading into an age of piracy. And this is the world that he lives in.
Maybe we're just a bunch of cucks and don't see where the world's going.
Yeah, and I think that's really quite beautiful because he's a beautiful person, and I hope his premonitions of the future are true and accurate.
God, I hope he's shredded. I hope he's 20 kilos of lean muscle.
Could you imagine if he's like 6'5", 120, like shredded to the bones?
That would make me so happy. That would make me a Bronze Age disciple. Instantly.
Oh God.
Could not resist a set of juicy, shredded lats that wrote the Bronze Age mindset.
No homo though.
No, this is a Bronze Age friendship.
This.
On that note, thank you for listening to the first episode of Pose Law Podcast. I'm Jack with my esteemed colleague Levi. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.